Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the Virtual CISO Moment. Chuck Anderson joins us today. He is the business owner for Reliant Managed Services, LLC. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Happy to have you here. Would love to hear about your history, how that you got started in the technology space, and then ultimately curious to, take us all the way up to where you're at now and what led you to start your own business. Always curious about folks that start their own business.
Yeah. Started a long time ago. And, a little bit about me is I married up. She's kept me around for 33 years.
Awesome.
I don't know how, but father too. And then I'm not a VCSO, but I help them out. Mostly on a project SOW type basis, and I'm not really a MSP either, but I'm kind of in the middle between the two. So as folks are either recovering from a breach and they have activities that they need to do to fix after that they didn't have time to do before, or beforehand and you're planning and you need to roll out a product, or you need some work done to just kind of organize stuff. That's kind of where I've fallen into, and it works. Large efforts that are not a lot of work, just a lot of repeatability. So I'm really good at driving to zero.
So how did you get started in IT?
Yeah. I started off in college actually, and way back when, I got paid with a Diet Coke, and I got to be paid to learn $6 an hour. And I started off changing floppy drives from 5-inch to 3-inch drives, and I was working with other students and stuff like that. And before I knew it, all those students had jobs, and their employers would ask them if they knew a student who knew how to do computers. And then I got shoulder tapped to help out, and before I knew it, within like a year, I had set up my first company. And I was doing more work on PCs for the small businesses that were starting then, like under 10 computers in the whole office kind of bit. I landed into an industry while I was trying to go to school. It was hard to do both, right? So and it started off as a VAR. And then after I got all the hardware sorted out for the couple of customers, I got into Clipper and then Microsoft Access databases to help them out. And then that moved into VB.NET programming and C++, and I wrote several million lines of code doing that, and then transitioned into a DBA, and I learned how to do all that stuff. Then that took me back into server admin, and then I got into endpoint protection and patching to manage that at scale as my skills increased and started working at bigger companies. And then somewhere along the way, somebody figured out I could be trusted with a checkbook, and that turned me into a project manager. and as a project manager who actually knew how to spell DBA, it helped, and I knew what Active Directory was and all this stuff. So from there, then they needed somebody to help out with doing these larger scale deployments and that kind of stuff. And then nowadays I'm back to putting defensive tools in place in the enterprise. So somebody in IT at the leadership level, and then security will say, hey, we need to have X, and I'll come in to help make sure it's rolled out without breaking everything. And that's kind of what I've made a career out of, is just helping out where I can and making things better than I found them, and then keep going from that.
We share a similar genesis, if you will, because my first job was working in a university part-time as a network technician. It was a better part-time job than going to Burger King, and that obviously was the birthing of a 34, 5-ish year career. Now I can't remember what the numbers don't matter anymore. But I will say this, though. I did not go to school to do this. My major was mechanical engineering, and I'm suspecting that you probably had a different major too.
At one time, I was doing hazardous materials management as a major.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with cybersecurity or IT.
Exactly. And then I got the sidetrack into doing this stuff originally, and then I struggled to get back into school. So my shortcut to keep me going throughout my career was grab a certificate whenever I could, because I've
Yeah.
always been a lifelong learner. And, just getting the cert is the stamp on, yeah, I did it and I achieved something, until I finally got my degree. I only got my degree like 4 or 5 years ago because of COVID. Thank you.
And being able to do it online, because that's not something that we were able
Exactly.
to do 30 years
No,
ago
no,
or
not at
whatever,
all. Not at all at
Yeah.
all. And I finally found an education system that matched my learning style. So I was going to school full time for a couple of years while I was working too.
Wow.
And take a lot of time flying a keyboard, but it was good to be able to do that. Now today's situation is a lot different for our youngsters coming in
Mm.
than when I started. So um, in my heart, I really want to help with that, and I have in different areas. But that's kind of a little bit later on. Is my future goal is to help make a difference on that side. So
Now, you do say, looking at your LinkedIn, that in talking about starting Reliant Managed Services, that after being a 1099 for some time, that's 1099 contractor for folks that don't know the
yep,
shorthand. It's different than if you're an employee, you're what we call a W-2. If you're a contractor, you're
correct.
1099. It doesn't sound like that it's too much difference except for a couple of letters, but boy, when it comes to tax time and how you're paid and all that, it makes a heck of a lot of difference. But now,
It does.
what you said that after being a 1099 contractor, it's time to set up a company. What
Yes.
was the trigger in your mind to make it time to set up the company?
Well, because as a 1099, the way I understand it, and don't take this as legal advice or anything like that, but
Did you stay at a Holiday Inn Express?
um, I have in the past. I have in
Okay,
the past, but not recently. I mean,
so your knowledge is valuable here then.
fair enough. From what I understand, you're not supposed to stay at 1099 forever, because that can get your. Excuse, my cat is coming in to say hi, and she'll be fine. The um, the 1099, you're not supposed to stay at that for very long. If you can get your employer in trouble, because that's supposed to be a subcontractor where you have more than one customer, right?
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
if you're at the same spot for long, you really need to have more customers anyway, because that's you got all your eggs in one basket, right?
Hmm.
So the easier way to do that is you set up an LLC. I went ahead and did an S corp, which you all should look at the differences for that. There are corporate taxes you have to pay, business taxes you have to pay, the business side of your payroll, and then your tax, and then your actual paycheck. And
Hmm.
you need to get all that set up when you step over into creating your own LLC. Get yourself some professional financial advice to make that happen. But once you have your LLC set up, then it's easier for you to get more than one customer,
Right.
and more opportunities open up, and you're able to put expenses into different categories that may or may not be taxed up front. And instead of after you get your paycheck and you're paying for your dues, instead of having to pull that out after at tax time, you can put that into your actually um, into categories inside of your business. and
Right,
and
as a business expense, which they really
exactly,
are. Which so
exactly,
there are benefits to being an LLC. There are things that you got to people need to understand. Again, I kind of joked about the taxes and all that, but like the simple one is just like you're paying employer and employee taxes. So immediately
correct.
out the gate, it's like you're paying almost double. It seems like there, but it is doable. But I think one of the most important things about forming an LLC also, and this is what I advise folks that want to go down that path, is it separates your personal from your business.
Business,
Limited
absolutely.
liability corporation. That's what LLC stands for, and it really that is so important to help protect you from any sort of issues. Um, what
Yeah,
what is a typical client size look like to you?
that's really a loaded question.
Thank you.
um
I try.
I've worked with folks that had one computer and four employees,
Uh-huh.
all the way up through right now. I'm at a medium large size contract with a very large healthcare system. So it runs the range of what opportunity hits and which activities you can run through. if
And
that makes
so I know that you're not specifically doing virtual CISO work, and
correct.
this isn't a virtual CISO question, but it is a general information security. And then I always like to tell folks that from my perspective, I see information security as an overall arching umbrella.
Yep.
Cyber is a portion of that. So,
Yep.
but from your perspective, whether it be information security risks or cybersecurity risks or a combination of both, what are one or a couple of the most significant threats that your small and mid-sized businesses that you've seen face in that realm, since you do work with a large variety of companies, you have worked with a large variety of companies, and you're probably pretty attuned to what threats that they tend to see.
Yep. Yep. Um, Across the board, this is not limited to small companies, but across the board is the basics. That's that's the first place I start. It's generally free, but if you don't do it, no matter what your other things are, if you have a expensive service sitting on top of it, if you're not doing your patching,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have an inventory of what you have that's connecting to the internet, you don't know how to protect it. Um, if you don't have modern hardware and software, like if you're running a copy of Windows XP Service Pack 3 sitting in the back room, um, you're going to have a lot of other things you're going to have to do to protect that machine rather than just upgrade it, right? Um, that same thing happens with enterprises. Some enterprises are running 2008 servers still. I just shudder at that on why, but I understand there are business reasons to do that. But in my mind, those open you up for um, more opportunities for exploit than you can cost effectively mitigate with all these additional tools and expense and all these harder you know um, hard and crunchy on the outside and soft and gooey on the inside kind of protection schemes. um, that's that's something that is just basic hygiene. If you don't have a backup, or if you have a backup, it's only as good as the last time you restored it. And a lot of people still don't practice their restores, so they don't know exactly what restore happened. Backing up your user folder is your number one defense against malware. Putting other tools on top of it and antivirus and all this stuff, if you don't have a backup, it's silly, right? And I think that's our biggest opportunity to focus on the basics and drive it down to zero. You got no machines that are not patched. You got no machines that haven't been upgraded. You've got all your passwords are tracked correctly. Those that basic 4 or 5 8 times kind of things are the ones that I think are the biggest vulnerability. And then the second thing I think that's coming up, which after you have all that done, don't worry about anything else until you have that done. The other thing that's coming up is digital AI attacks and machine
Mm.
learning from criminal automation, where they're building kill chains and figuring out how to get through multiple exploits at one time. That's more sophisticated, but often you can break a kill chain by just having a patch, right? so,
Right.
so a lot of those go away just with some basic operations, basic hygiene. And then I think the one on the horizon is AI identity fraud, which is huge from a user and a machine identity aspect, which I don't think we're fully aware of publicly about all the dangers in that area, and that's still coming. But again, worrying about the boogeyman there is important. But if you're not patching everything, if you're not backing it up, if you're not doing the basics, who cares on the other stuff? You're vulnerable to the cavemen that are out there right now, instead of worrying about the guys running Ferraris and the really really sophisticated attacks.
Well, you mentioned that there could be business reasons as to why they the C-suite has kept like some items in place. Like one
Yes.
common one would be that, for example, in banking, I know some more legacy core systems, they may require that you have an older version. I guess saying older version of Internet Explorer is redundant nowadays. So um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so they're trying to make a business decision, it sounds like. But I, at least from my perspective, what I've seen, and tell me if you agree or disagree, sometimes I think that they make business decisions without understanding the technology risk. And they just think, well, it's fine. We have other things in place. It's just fine. We can run XP. We can run Internet Explorer, whatever the last version was.
Yes.
What would you, how would you approach that with the business to try to explain to them that there are some significant threats involved with having these either systems that you can't patch or systems that you won't patch in your infrastructure?
Yeah, that is a hard question, and a lot of people struggle with it. Unfortunately, most of the way I've seen people work that problem is shopping the risk around until somebody gets a number they like, because a lot of these risks are subjective instead of objective, right? You can't put a dollar amount on a potential breach. You can put the dollar amount after the breach, right? You can put a guess on a potential breach, but figuring out the two often leads to shenanigans, if I can use that word a little bit.
You can make an assessment, a risk assessment, say almost anything you want to, which is unfortunate because then we kind of lose a little bit of trust. I think that's where you're going.
Exactly. And that's not really the purpose of security either. I mean, really, in my view, the best security is invisible, and it tells the organization things it doesn't know. And then it offers solutions on how to protect its assets, data on up. And those are the three cores of security, not whether or not you have 802 I'm sorry, 800.171 compliance. That's like things on top of it that are more like operational goals and objectives. But really, the core of it is are you telling the organization things it doesn't know that it needs to know? Right. Are you giving it recommendations? And it's up to them to decide whether or not to do it or not.
Correct.
And then also to have security that's invisible. You don't want to have security that makes, whenever possible, you don't want to have security that makes more work for people to do. Right.
Because they'll find another way to do their job. Right. I mean, if you have a file sharing system that requires 15 factors to get to retina scan, blood sample, and all that, they're going to be like, listen, my customers aren't going to deal with this. I'm just going to go put it in Dropbox somewhere. And then now you've totally obfuscated the reason for having your security program, and you've blown it. So
yeah, exactly. Now I've also had the opposite of that happen, where there's like an elevator controller out of the customer, like, oh God, almost 20 years ago, that the elevator controller was put out by a very well-known elevator company, and it was a 16-bit app. Now that's old, right? And no, I think it might have even been 8-bit. No, I think it was 16. It was 16 because we were trying to get to 32-bit upgrade, and then from the 32-bit upgrade to the 3264, we couldn't get brought modern. And the elevator company wanted like $1.2 million to upgrade that one app, and it's sitting on one ancient machine in the basement of some building. And it was a problem mainly because it wasn't protected. We couldn't load on the modern tools, we couldn't whatever, and we ended up getting it protected by basically epoxying all the ports on it. So we couldn't put anything in it, and we just had to deal with what the app was itself. And there's ways around that kind of stuff.
And that's the perfect solution, because if you can't fix the primary control for whatever reason, sometimes there are valid business reasons. And I would submit that paying $1.2 million to unnamed elevator company, which we probably all know anyway, because you just have to look at like 90% of the elevators. But at $1.2 million to upgrade to fix that sort of a problem, that's a no-brainer business decision. It's like, I mean, without understanding extenuating circumstances, of course, but I mean, that's ridiculous. And yet you can easily control that risk. Because I mean, when you're talking about like an unpatched system that has to run 16-bit architecture, you're what are the risks? I mean, it's going to still run fine. You just got to make sure that it is encased, that it only has like the traffic going in and out that it needs to. And then that's how you mitigate the risk. And unfortunately, I think that on the technology side and on the business side, sometimes neither see that possibility. So the technology side, you got all the technologists saying, you must do this. On the business side, you've got all the folks saying, we just have to accept it as is. I don't want to hear anything more about it. That's just the way it is. It's those like what you were saying, what you did were who are trying to find a solution in the middle there that works for everybody. And that's why information security is risk management at the core.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll tell you, it was a lot of fun too, because when I headed into the meeting, as everyone's all vibrating, trying to figure out how to make this happen, and I pull out a $3.50 packet of two-part epoxy and an injector wrapped up in the package, and I put it on the table and said, "Hey, what about this?" It's nice to have those kind of conversations and still have a sense of humor about it, right? So,
when you were talking about actually blocking ports, you were talking about physically the epoxy.
We
epoxied I didn't catch that at first. Yeah,
there's a little bit more to the story here, but we needed to isolate it from the entire network, from everything, USB stick, from the port on the network, and
clog it up, and
just
that works perfectly.
And the only connection out of that machine was to the elevator controller, so it was an appliance at that point, and it got through all the rest of the noise, took care of all of our other stuff, and we were able to save having to buy other protection products on the other side to protect this thing, because we eliminated the problem.
That's perfect.
Right?
That's the way, and then that's the kind of thinking that like I said, we need to have on both sides of the equation, the business and the technology side. Well, I do know though that, and I'm assuming that you probably have felt the same, that sometimes like information security, information technology can be a stressful arena, in particular, like in technology, when you're having to solve things sometimes at 2:30 in the morning. I always used to like to joke about, I never liked my pager going off. And of course, if I use the word pager, it's like a lot of people out there don't know what I'm talking about nowadays, but I still have my old first pager somewhere. Sorry, University of Buffalo, I forgot to return it. But it can be a very stressful. There you go. Is it a Nokia or
yes,
Nokia?
Sir.
Yeah,
Still
that's
works.
what it looks like. Oh, that's awesome. I have, okay, since you brought that out, little unknown fact about me that I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast, but I have every single cell phone that I have ever owned. I never returned one. I've got the whole thing. It's in my, what I call my museum. And it's amazing to watch the progression, how it all goes. And to imagine that something like what you actually, my first one was a Motorola Flip. It was like not a brick, but with the orange like LED screen. To think that something like that would migrate to something like this is just like amazing. Oops, I just showed you my phone number on there. Sorry about that. I forgot what I was talking about. Stress. These things stress us out so much, and I encourage people. It's a tough world out there right now. I mean, the job market is just not. I have told people that the job market out there is the worst that I've seen in my 35 years. Now, I do think it's improving. I think the last 2 or 3 months, you got that palpable feeling that it's actually, we're coming out of it. And it always happens that way. You've got the pendulum swinging back and forth. You see that enough, it's just like, don't go looking for a job now if you don't have one lined up. That's the best little bit of advice. But it is stressful, and it is stressful, again, from the technology side, getting called in, from the security side, trying to protect and trying to get through those issues where you've got those that you have controls that may fail. Got to get away and decompress. That's the word I like to use. You got to do something to get away from the stress. Chuck, what's one of the things that you do to decompress from the stresses of cyber?
Make things, or
make things.
Figure out how to make things.
Okay.
So, it can be like as simple as just putting your hands in some dirt and planting some seeds and just go, hey, look, that came up. That's pretty cool. All the way up through the current thing I'm planning right now is doing some metal casting, and I'm figuring out how to do CAD CAM mold designs so I can cast some parts in the backyard.
Oh, that's neat. That just triggered the latent mechanical engineering student part of me in there, because I know we we would design parts, we would machine them. Well, we would send them to the shop to be milled, and they would come
Hmm.
back with the parts that we needed for whatever project we
Yeah.
were working
Yeah.
on. What was it that the university was working on? Some sort of an aircraft type thing, and we were working on one hub for the spinner of the
Hmm.
propeller. I remember that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
There's a lot of mechanical parts that are no longer made, and to keep some of the older tractors and older farm equipment, being in the ag side, it's a handy thing for us to be able to reproduce one-off parts if we have to. So that's
yeah,
kind of where I'm headed towards. Kind of as my little, I don't know what you call it when you're retired and you're just kind of putzing around in the shop. That's kind of what I'm looking forward to, is having that all set up by the time I retire.
and I am as well too. The only thing is that I don't know if I'm ever going to retire, because I enjoy doing this. I kind of retired from corporate 7 years ago and started the virtual the VC social services,
Yep.
and with the whole idea that this was going to ease me into retirement, and it became,
Yep. Yep.
there's just other things going on now that I just love, and podcasts being one of them. This is a
Yep.
blessing that I have.
Yep. Yep. Hey,
So
do you mind if I add one more thing here? I have some advice for
yeah,
new folks on how they can, um, if they're looking for that first job or they're in between gigs right now in security. Just a couple of things, and it's kind of hard to hear this, but make sure you're doing something. You can volunteer and put that down on a resume. Hey, I did this for this company, and these are the things we did. You can write some open source code and put that out there and list on your resume. You built this security script that does this or whatever. You can also volunteer if you're stuck between jobs and you do your applications on Monday and Tuesday. Set up a reoccurring thing on Thursdays that you go out and help a charity that you like, and just show up and work on it, and it'll get you out of the house, and it will also make you feel better because you're doing something while you're still trying to get everything else to work.
yeah,
So
and
anyway, that's just some advice.
offer maybe to speak at like chamber events
Oh,
or other things. It's
absolutely.
like, if you can show on your resume that, I mean, everybody's got a blank period. I mean, it happens.
Absolutely.
I understand
Absolutely.
that. And you fill it with something. I shouldn't say everybody has a blank period, but everybody understands that that happens.
Yep.
But don't just sit around and, what, putzing, is that the
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
word?
Yeah.
Putzing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, you have to spend. I mean, I know that applying to jobs and all that in and of itself is a
Oh, it's
full-time job,
awful.
but
It's awful.
continue. Great advice. I appreciate that. And I have one last question for you then, kind of
Shoot.
along those lines. Now, outside
Okay.
of making things, which I agree, it is so satisfying to see something that you've created. I mean, even to the point of, this is second edition, but I've got third edition of this book coming out October 1st, and um,
Can you hold that up again? I saw the red one you had, and that one's
this
working out
is
by the other.
this is
Which
the
one's that?
yeah, this is the second edition. The red one is the
Oh,
third edition. So
okay. Yeah.
the third one will be out October 1st. I'm pre-ordering will be available soon. It's actually out on
Excellent.
Amazon, but making one final tweak to the interior. So, but
Great.
what's something that you've got future plans coming up?
Just trying to make a difference, and that's my daily struggle. Every couple of years, I get a burr in my saddle, and I do a talk, and folks that know me realize that when I do a talk, it could be an eclectic target choice, but when I do it, it's generally something I want to say that I think is important, and I get it out to the community. And then there's some vibrations from that where, hey, what happened here, blah 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 blah. And the last one I just did was last month. I did a talk on securing software production software build environments. I think that's very important, and the I covered a bit on the government regulation that's coming up that hasn't happened yet, but it's in the process, which will put the equivalent of a nutrition label on software. And I don't know if
Right.
you've heard about that yet. Um,
I have. I don't know where it is in the whole process, but I know that it's been something
well,
that's been talked about.
if you look at my LinkedIn page, I actually refer back to the documents that generated it. It started off with an executive order. It's went through several parts of NIST and CISA. And then I actually have the list for the requirements of what they're looking are going to be in there, along with examples of, and I can't remember which European country already has it up in place. So I've
Oh,
got
okay.
a link where you can look and see where that is. But that's on the presentation I just did last month.
I'm looking forward to taking a look at that, and I love the
Yes,
idea
sir.
of making a difference, because at the end of the day, as you get, I tell folks this all the time too, that as you get further and further in your career, it's really when you get to the point of, it's great to make all this technology work, help secure folks and this and that, but really looking back and looking forward, it's making a difference some way, shape, or form. And sometimes we plant seeds, to use your planting analogy, and we don't get to see what we make.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
I mean, even from this podcast, you may never
Mhm.
know. But it's a couple of the pieces of advice that you gave for those who are in between jobs and looking right now, that may plant a seed in someone. You never know where it'll go. And I appreciate you sharing all of
Absolutely.
that. That's
And
great.
and also for you, thank you very much for everything you're doing for the community. It's I can just imagine that sometimes it's thankless, but honestly, thank you very much for putting that out there. You're doing this podcast. You have other talks you put out there. You're always there to help somebody and encourage somebody else. And I don't know if enough people call you out on that. So I am publicly calling you out on that and saying thank you for doing that, honestly and truly. All right. So
Well,
yeah,
thank
just
you.
keep it up, man. Keep it up.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you got
It's a labor of love, and I again and I actually went out in the end because I get to hear all these great stories. I ask questions and people tell me their stories, and I'm like, well, that's great. And occasionally I learn something, So,
Yeah, that's cool. That's
well,
very cool.
Chuck,
Thank you,
th-
sir.
thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciated you taking your time.
Well, thank you.
Blooper reel.
Well,
No, I
we can't
appreciate
all
your
be
time.
perfect. We got to celebrate our differences, man. We got to celebrate our differences. All right.
Excellent.
Thank
And
you.
everybody, stay secure.